land reform, basic health care, basic education. These are pretty basic things. These aren't radical proposals that, abolish capitalism and, expropriate the banks and nationalize all the factories and so on. These are just basic things. The problem, of course, was that the example of these little things was emboldening the people of Venezuela to realize that they could actually play a role in politics, that they didn't have to be silent, that they could come out on the streets, that they could learn how to read, that they could have a role to play with their constitution, that they could participate in local government and national government and so on. And this political awakening that really started to take off before and after he was elected, it was the real danger that they had to stop. So a lot of people say that Hugo Chavez is a dictator or whatever. But as you've seen, he was elected in 1998. In 1999, then, after they drafted a new constitution with the participation of the people of Venezuela, all these different committees got together to write up this new constitution, which is extremely democratic, especially from the perspective of even the U.S. Constitution. After they had a referendum to approve the Constitution, he then ran for president again to say, okay, we got a new Constitution, that means it's a new republic, it's a new government, we need to reaffirm my powers. Once again, he wins overwhelmingly. So again, he's elected, and so not really much of a dictator there. Big turning point then in this whole process, and I'm sure everybody's really familiar with this part of it at least, was April 2002, when there was a coup against Chavez. Now, PDVSA, the state-owned oil company, had been nationalized back in the 1970s. I think 1976 had already been nationalized, was under state control, kind of like the Mexican oil company, Pemex, is under state control. But, of course, a handful of people were running this like their own private business. All of those revenues, instead of going towards social programs and towards benefiting the people of Venezuela, all those revenues were going to a tiny handful of people. I mean, I think there was like $40 billion went missing over a period. Hundreds of thousands of barrels a month that just were unaccounted for, that were being sold off on the side by the executives, running it like a private company, even though it was supposed to be a state-owned company. Well, Chavez implemented some basic measures, basically getting rid of some of the most corrupt officials in that company, and that, of course, was just too much for the United States, the U.S. government defending the oil companies' interests in Venezuela, and of course the local oligarchy, who saw that they were starting to lose control. They launched this coup April 2002, April 11th, in fact, and anybody who's seen the revolution will not be televised, has seen how amazing the reaction was. The people of Venezuela, who, again, came down from the mountains, brought Chavez back for the first time, at least in recent history, where a new government has already been established, already been recognized by the United States government, backed fully by the U.S. Embassy and the CIA. This has all come to light through Freedom of Information Act requests. This isn't a conspiracy theory. The United States government did actively plan, participate, and support this coup. The people came back and said, you know what, we don't think so. We voted for this guy. We will decide when he gets thrown out of office. And they brought him back. So that was a really important radicalization of the process. Now, Chavez, he attempted at that time to reconcile himself and the whole of society with all its contradictions. So on the one hand, you have the vast majority of people in Venezuela, or of any country, which are working people, urban poor, peasants in Venezuela. And on the other hand, you've got a tiny handful of capitalists and imperialists. Though their interests are completely incompatible with each other. And yet, Chavez, maybe it's because he's a nice guy, I don't know why, decided, well, sure, you overthrew me, you killed a bunch of people, you were about to shoot me, but can't we all just get along? And of course, this, there's a saying that says, weakness invites aggression. And the oligarchy, they hadn't succeeded in overthrowing him. U.S. imperialism hadn't succeeded in overthrowing this revolutionary process in such an important oil country. So, of course, they came back for more. Just a few months later, in the winter of 2002, 2003, they staged an oil lockout, a sabotage of the oil industry, the most important industry in the country. Of course, here it was presented as a strike. The workers are striking against this evil dictator Chavez and blah, blah, blah. But the fact is that it was all the executives, about 16,000 to 17,000 executives that walked out. The engineers, they wrecked their computers, they poured sand in the pipelines. I mean, they destroyed the national lifeblood. That's how much these people love their country. They'd rather destroy it than let someone else get the benefits from it. So over a period of weeks then, the workers in the oil industry, and just in the communities and even the involvement of the National Guard and so on, they slowly got the oil industry going again. They formed workers' councils. They figured out, well, you used to work with, in this position, and you kind of know how to do that. And people came together. People came from other countries that had oil industry knowledge, and communities were all getting involved, and they got it going manually. Now, this is one of the most sophisticated, technologically advanced industries in the world, and they were able to get, to load ships manually with the oil, just like in the old days, in order to get the flow going again, and that broke the back of that coup attempt once again, an attempt to create discontent with the government, to create, economic crisis, so that the people would then say, well, this Chavez guy's no good, we're going to get rid of him. So that was 2002. 2004, I'm sorry for this lengthy background, but there's a lot to it. In 2004 then, yet another attempt to try and get rid of the government. This time a legal attempt, so-called, although because there was a lot of fraud and underhanded stuff going on during the August 2004 recall referendum. Now, the new Constitution of 1999 said basically that, and it's a very democratic function, that midway between the term of elected officials, if you gather a certain number of signatures, you could have a recall. You could call basically an early election, an early referendum on the person's rule. Now, of course, the oligarchy, they were completely against this. They fought against this when the new Constitution was being drafted. But since everything else had failed, they decided, well, why don't we use this recall thing that's in the new Constitution to try and get rid of Chavez? So after this campaign of, they would go to factories and say, look, you sign this saying that you want to have the referendum or you're fired. Or they'd go to hospitals and say, look, you sign this or you don't get your medicine. Or dead people, the graveyard vote. All of these names of people that are, can't vote anymore showed up on these petitions. So there's all kinds of fraud going on. But nonetheless, they allowed this election to go through, and once again, Chavez was overwhelmingly reaffirmed in power. Then came 2006, which is another turning point, another electoral turning point in the country, when you had presidential elections. This is the first time that Chavez is going to be up for re-election under the new Constitution. Now, some of us in this room actually were there in 2006, and it was an amazing situation. I mean, the tension on the streets, as well as the enthusiasm of the people for Chavez. Mass demonstrations of 1.5 million people, 2 million people. The entire city of Caracas completely covered in red. Really an incredible experience, and you could just feel and see on people's faces how strongly they support the revolution, how strongly they want the social programs to continue, how strongly they want things to go even further. And in 2006 then, Chavez won an overwhelming victory. Once again, I think he got 62% of the vote this time, the biggest vote total in the history of the country. Once again reaffirming that the people want the changes that he's proposed. Now, what are some of those changes? Well, a lot of people are familiar with the social programs, the misiones, the healthcare, with the help of the Cuban doctors, of course. The elimination of illiteracy in the country. There's only 2 countries in the Western Hemisphere that have eliminated illiteracy. That's Cuba and Venezuela. Food programs, help with housing, all kinds of programs that have been implemented to use those oil revenues to actually help improve people's lives. But some of the other things that Chavez is proposing is pretty straightforward. He basically said that this is a socialist revolution, that this is going to be a revolution that is going to be transcend the boundaries of the old society. And in a very confused way, in my opinion, they've been kind of working towards that over this entire period. But that vote was an affirmation by the people I mean, if you're on the streets on election night, and when Chavez came out and said, this is a vote for socialism, and people just went insanely crazy happy, I mean, it was clear what